Hey friends, this interview was fire. Not only do we discuss the intricacies of hiring and the corporate world, but we also dig into some of the systemic hiring and employee retention issues that run rampant through corporate. I've known Brian Wright for a few years, and because we are in similar worlds, I always love our conversations. It's more than story and tips. We get into broader issues and have philosophical conversations about recruiting, hiring, talent, and career development. When I tell you that we covered a lot of topics, we do. Everything from family and legacy and how it impacts your view of your career opportunities, developing current talent, recognizing your skills gap for future positions, generational shifts about working in corporate, building your story as a candidate, discussing the Great Resignation, of which Brian has some great thoughts, and more. Yes, more than that. As no surprise, we also discuss LinkedIn and its benefits from a candidate perspective and recruiting perspective. It's also how Brian and I have stayed connected and how we stay up to date regarding each other's businesses. For those looking to take their LinkedIn presence to the next level, check out my course, LinkedIn Level Up for the Corporate Professional, which will help you upgrade your profile, build intentional connections, and become a thought or industry leader through your content. This course also comes with a 1-hour strategy and coaching session with me, where we review your profile, posts, and stats to build a custom strategy that complements your career goals. For those listening to the audio-only version of this episode, my apologies in advance for a few areas where the audio dropped out on my end. It won't change the context of what's being said in that moment, and if you'd like to watch the interview, I added the intended language into the captions. If you're looking for links to the resources mentioned in this episode, you can head over to ridethetidecollective.com/podcast to find the episode blog, and I'll link it in the show notes. As always, if you want to connect with me or need inspirational or educational career management and advancement content, you can follow Ride the Tide Collective on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. I'm also on Clubhouse now at Ride the Tide COL. If you're loving these interview episodes, please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out. And if you didn't know, I also have the video version of this interview up on my YouTube channel, which you can also subscribe to. Just search Ride the Tide Collective. As always, I appreciate your support. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited for my guest today because this is somebody that I have been connected with for many years, and I don't even remember how we got connected, but it was back when I was working in higher education, and Brian was actually working for Fox at the time. Correct. In talent acquisition, and I'm pretty sure you were like the head of all the talent acquisition things at Fox. And so there was a connection there in terms of what I was doing with career development and you looking for talent and coming to speak to our students and all of that. But Brian, I'm so excited to have you because your career has been it's been absolutely insane. Like, you have been in recruiting and talent acquisition forever for some major, major companies on more of the entertainment side of recruiting. So you're based in LA. You've worked for House of Blues, the WB. You've been on boards. You worked for Fox. Your career has been absolutely insane. And most recently, though, what I love is you actually made a pivot. And this was like 4 years ago, so it hasn't been that recent. But you made a pivot from being internal in terms of recruiting and talent acquisition to more external. And so now you have your own company, you do recruitment consulting, you do all kinds of you do all kinds of stuff. It's absolutely insane what you have on your plate right now. But I'm so happy to have you here talking to my audience, not only about your journey within recruiting, but we're also going to talk about just some tips and tricks for people who are looking to transition in their career and what recruiters are looking for. So thank you for agreeing to be on my podcast.
Julia, thank you so much. You are a shining light. I remember meeting you when I believe Drucker was considering having a creative economy school or curriculum.
Yes.
And
Yes,
you
that's
all
right.
invited a bunch of us out from different companies to kind of just have the discussion about it. And that's where I had a chance to meet you and the team out there. But what I realized in how I at least observed you operating was that it was such a fine line between the nurturing and the coaching and counseling of the students, but then also the in the employer relations, where you were
Mhm.
having to really work with all the companies. And I appreciated that engagement from you. So thank you for having me. And I'm so proud of your podcast and your amazing marketing. And yeah, like I
Thank
said, you're a shining
you.
light.
Thank you so much. And oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that. That was like early when I first started at so that was not on my radar at all. But yes, I do remember that. Oh my gosh. It's so this is what I love is, we've known each other for many years, and you want to know what keeps us connected? LinkedIn. And that's one of the coolest things about that platform is it keeps you connected to people. And as I was scrolling through looking for guests, your name popped up and I was like, oh, I have to have Brian.
Oh, that's
I
awesome.
knew that you would provide so much value about your journey and then just helping my audience with their transitions as well. So, okay, we got to jump into it because I know you and I tend to talk. And so I want to make sure that we get all this information out there for everybody. So let's talk about what you are currently doing in your company right now, because I think that for people who are interested in talent acquisition and recruiting, this is a little bit different of a path that not everybody thinks about when it comes to recruitment. So can you tell us a little bit about what your company is doing?
Sure. And I appreciate, number one, this opportunity to explain it. I do think that I need to start with some context on where I came from and how I got started, because there is a book by a gentleman named Sam Greenlee, and it's called The Spook That Sat Near the Door. And there's also a movie that he bootstrapped and got online. It's on YouTube. But the point of it is someone that has been inside of an institution, had the privilege of understanding how that institution works, its secrets, unfortunately, where bodies are buried, just really all of the workflows, all of the decision making, as much as, you can be exposed to that. And in the movie, in the book, the person decides to share that information with the community because it's more important to have the community aware of what those institutions are doing than would be just for him to be successful within those institutions. So, Max Edwards Company was a company that was started actually by my father, who was a 45-year veteran in human resources. And so, although I didn't live with him throughout most of my years, I just knew he was a businessman. I ended up going to college and selecting HR primarily because I was a broken down football player and was trying to figure out a way of leveraging my skill set on evaluating talent, trying to defeat my opponent, things like that. But I was always good at picking teams. I was always good at seeing other people's skills. And so business administration, HR came up. I selected it. I call him to let him know this is what I selected. He's like, that's what I do, right? I'm in HR. I'm like, no, I didn't know. So anyway, so the story is I'm a third generation HR person in my family. And
Wow.
so, and it leads to the point of the book that I was mentioning, because in going through my corporate experience, I had to figure out how to survive in this, environment that I wasn't necessarily accustomed to. And those insights, strategies, you know, um, things that I overcame or things that I didn't overcome, that were tough to deal with. It was all data. It was all information. So Max Edwards Company is the intersection between corporate needs, workforce demands, and recruiting strategies, but also the talent pools and the community and the knowledge that they need to be able to gainfully gain employment, to be top candidates. And I think, oftentimes in the recruiting process, as you know, it's almost like the two entities are passing like ships in the night.
Yep.
The companies are saying we need this and there's a skills gap, and then the candidates are like, well, I did my resume and I don't know why I'm not getting calls back, and there's no growth. And so there's just a disconnect. So we try to be the intersection between those two entities. I just passed my 4-year anniversary of being with the company. Unfortunately, my father passed away in 2017. I did have a chance to work with him for 6 months, which was, a true blessing and an honor. And so I try to continue his legacy of excellence in any way I can, and pass on knowledge that obviously I was fortunate to receive from him as well.
Amazing. That's amazing. Oh my gosh. Okay. You're bringing up so many things that I want to ask questions about. We're going to have to come back to the football player thing, because I totally forgot that you are a football player. So we'll circle back to that in a minute. But oh my gosh, first of all, so sorry about your father. I lost my parents as well. And it's, there's something that happens. I literally, right before this interview, I recorded a video about legacy.
Wow.
Because yes. And so I'm hearing you say this and I'm like, oh my gosh, this connection is so crazy. Because I didn't have that legacy like you're talking about, right? So you're kind of taking what your father did that you didn't even realize and continuing that on, which I think is to understand that about ourselves and our past and our family and what they've done, I think is so important, because it helps us kind of model and think about some of those generational things that we want to pass down, and then maybe some of the things we don't want to pass down.
Absolutely.
But my parents were teachers. So that was something that I was like, well, that there was kind of a gap there, but my grandparents on both sides were business owners. And so on this recent trip to California, I actually got to learn a little bit more about my grandfather's business that he had and sold long before I was born and all that. So anyway, I'm making all these connections with this legacy thing because I think it's so important to have that understanding and to ask questions of your parents, your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, like learn what they do and who they are, because I think it helps us. And a lot of times we only see them in a familial context, which is not the only version of them that exists. And so to understand who they are as professionals as well, like I learned some things about my grandfather that I was like, I had no idea. And I saw his level of integrity as a business owner back then. And that, like, it kind of shot something in me of, oh, okay, that legacy runs in me, even though I wasn't around for it. So anyway, okay, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but
it's actually, I this is all really divine, because the way that you're describing it is the challenge for young people, and really all talent at this stage. We're in such a digital media, surface, superficial, at the moment, snapshot in time kind of mindset, that without that foundation of what you're talking about and understanding oral history and, having a frame of reference for when things aren't going well, you need an anchor that ties you to something that's greater than what's happening at the moment. And I think that's where the current generations are getting the moniker of being not as loyal, or kind of frivolous, or where they're ghosting people and things like that. And it's probably true to a certain extent. But if you're only measuring yourself off of what's happening today and you don't have an anchor, like, how do you get into an interview and share with someone how you can add value if you don't understand your value? So I think the legacy piece that you bring up is really important. And one of the bigger things that we teach with Max Edwards is the first step to all of this is self-analysis. Now, knowing who you are, they say knowledge of self is so critical because, there's something that we teach called career architecture. And career architecture means from self-analysis, where you are. It's like the sign on the train station where it says you're here. And then, where you want to go. Yeah. So guess what? Whatever that gap is, you're already mapping out there's multiple paths. It's kind of like your GPS or your Waze or whatever. It's giving you multiple paths to get to where you need to go. Well, the path career-wise would be skill set, technology, real life experience, related experiences that you understand that you have. So again, if you don't know who you are, you don't know where you're going, it's really tough to design the career success that you likely want. And so we try to help that out with career architecture.
That's amazing. And I will tell you that type of self-analysis right now is so timely. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about this later in the interview, but with COVID and everything that went down in the last year and a half at the time of this recording, people are questioning everything. I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me and they're like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. My values have shifted. I now want this. I need this. They've lost people, right? So you and I understand that you lose people, especially parents, and all of a sudden something shifts in how you view the world. And I can't explain it unless you've been through it. And I think we're starting to see that. And what you're talking about, this career architecture and self-analysis and all, oh my gosh, that is so key right now. And I think organizations that invest in that for their people, they will be light years ahead of the game when it comes to retaining talent versus organizations that are just deal with it. So
yeah, a really big issue for companies right now, and we were talking about the shortage of recruiters, is that everyone is so desperate to get their positions filled. Mm-hmm. And then obviously people are being headhunted and, cherry picked away. So, the growth of the business, the ability to provide products and services all hinges on, that workforce being in place. Well, guess what? Right now, with it being such a candidates market, if you're only focused on recruiting, that means you're not protecting your current employees. There's likely inflation, so you're having to bring in people at higher rates. But again, you're not thinking of your internal employees. You're ratcheting up your expectations of skills and the experiences that the people need, because it's there's big shoes to fill. Yet you're not focused on the development of your internal employees. And so if it's not a system of, again, growth and pipeline building and talent pool building, dealing with the community, kind of engagement of your internal employees to help the recruiting process because they need to be a part of it in some way. And then obviously very intentional hiring at the more senior level. If it's not a system, I think it's a chase where you're just spending money. And I don't know if we're going to have the ability to do this long term.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And you would say this too, from a lot of your coaching, or you tell me, I think a lot of young people aren't thinking of working in corporate when they're in school or coming out of school.
I think, so I work primarily with millennials and Gen X. So people in their 30s and 40s right now. But I'm seeing more of what's happening with the younger millennials as well as the next gen. I think it's Gen Z is the next one.
Yes. Yeah, Gen Z.
Get all these generations mixed up. But I think they're nope. We're not messing around. And I think as a millennial, and I would be considered an elder millennial because I'm kind of in the middle, but we have started that transition of, do we want this? But we have families, we like stability still, whereas Gen Z is like, don't care. This is the life I want to live. I am not loyal to you, organizations, because I think of the internet, right? They have a different view of what that means and what it looks like, and it doesn't look good to them. So they're starting their own businesses, or they're joining smaller companies, or they're joining startups that are doing exciting things versus some of these larger, weighted down corporate entities. And that's what I'm observing. I don't know if that's what's going to actually end up happening once that generation comes into like having families or getting married, if that's even what they end up doing, because that's a whole other conversation. But we're starting to see the generations shift. And I think it's going to impact the world of work significantly in the next probably 10 to 20 years. And as millennials come into power positions, so your C-suite positions, VPs, and all of that, I think you will start to see us really be the voice of change in a lot of these larger organizations, but we're not quite there yet. Like, some are starting to break in,
True,
but not enough. And so I think it'll be interesting the next 10 years for millennials to see what they do in leadership, and the next 15 to 20 for Gen Z to see how they shift the corporate landscape. But having said that, there are still people who value stability. So that's one of the things that I talk about with my career coaching. Like, I'm a career coach for people who want to be in corporate. They want a steady paycheck. They want health benefits, because that stuff is expensive, let me tell you. They want some of that security, and they might do some stuff on the side, but they like that idea. I think you're always going to have people that do that. I just don't know if they're going to have enough coming up. So I think that's going to be an interesting shift that we see. But
and it may be coming quicker than we think, because the numbers on the skills gap are pretty broad right now, just where some jobs are going unfilled, especially when you get into more complex functions, whether it be in technology or others. And so think about it. Like, let me just say, a certain company that isn't a Google or, one of the more quote unquote sexy companies, how do they go and attract the best software engineers? I'm not saying that there wouldn't be a cascade or stratus of skills and experiences that would eventually want to work there, but it makes competition very tough to navigate if you're not doing something more than just the brand of what your company is.
Right.
I don't know how you stand out outside of all this clutter.
Right. Yeah. And I think, talking about Google, I think Google's making some huge waves in terms of skill development and their impact on higher education and what that means, because they're coming out with their own certificates, and we don't know the results of that yet. It's still so new that I don't think there's any data yet in terms of, the percentage of people that get hired from doing something like that. But they're making moves,
Sure.
They're trying to be innovative, and they're trying to fill that gap, the skills gap that you're talking about. And I think, oh my gosh, I could go on and on about this, but from a higher ed perspective, having come from higher ed is so slow to change. And I think the pandemic has brought that out even more, where people are coming out with degrees and not the skills to match. Not every program, it's not every school, it totally depends, but they need to pick it up.
Right.
They need to pick it up. They need to change.
How's that going to happen though? How do they do that?
I don't know. I honestly, having been in it, I was in it for 8 years. And one of the reasons I left was just the lack of movement. And at the top, people just stopping all innovation from happening. And for somebody my age, I'm a high achiever. I wasn't about that. I was like, if my life hadn't happened the way that it had, I would have left anyway. And I would have gone to corporate, because at least there things move and change. Not always, depends on the organization, but
Sure.
higher ed, they're going to have a lot of problems coming up, I think, in the next 10 years or so. And I think COVID really brought some of that to light. And I'll be interested to see, maybe in a year and a half, probably like next summer, I'll be interested to see what the numbers are in higher ed, because I think they're struggling right now for people not wanting to pay for it because the ROI isn't there.
And I think you and I had discussed briefly that many of the companies are changing their college recruiting teams to early stage or early career teams, meaning if they don't need to include solely college recruiting, and they're going to boot camps and 2-year programs. And so, I mean, again, the impact on graduate school or higher ed is that's going to be even more difficult. So this goes back to, you can't just, as a candidate, determine your value on what companies want. You really have to be someone that understands the whole package of what you want to be. And then you decide specifically what you go and get. Because if you're chasing what you think value is, there could be a situation where you get yourself a lot of debt and it's not something that you really needed or you don't want. Yeah. But if you feel like that's something that you need and you have a narrative about that, and you have a strong passion for that, I mean, as a recruiter, that's what I want to hear in the interview. I don't want to hear that you just checked a box of, hey, I robotically went and got this degree and now I'm ready and entitled and I should get this and that. No. You know what I mean? It needs to be more, and it could be less credentials, but you went out and bootstrapped a bunch of other experience and you have a story to tell about that. There's, some major collaborations where you went and helped other people, or you went heavy and, got the best education that you can and coupled that with the best internship experience. You just have to build your story. Yep. You have to.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. So when I got started in higher ed, I worked with everybody from freshmen to, retired people. Like ran the gamut, right? And I cannot tell you how many people I talked to who were freshmen, sophomores. They should not have been in college. And it wasn't because they weren't intelligent enough to be there. It had nothing to do with that. They just needed to go live life and they needed to find themselves for a little bit and then come back. And I've been having this conversation with some friends of mine who have kids who are graduating and all of that. And right now, like if I had to advise somebody who had a senior in high school, either out of 2020 or even going into 2021, and possibly even 2022, I would tell them, unless they are extremely focused on something specific that requires education, so being a doctor or, something like that, it's a really specific skill set, I wouldn't go right away. Honestly, I would wait. I would give yourself some time. I would go and work, maybe do a certification if that's something that interests you. It would be better for you to go work, and I'm not talking about like a food service job. I'm not talking about that, but some kind of like go work for a small business. Go work for like a local company. I don't care it doesn't matter what they do, but go work for a company so that you understand how a company works.
Sure.
Right? Like go get some type of experience outside of whatever you did in high school and then go back, because you need to find yourself. And I think right now with the way things are, I would not go straight into school right now. If you're not 100% sure of what you want to do, I don't think it's worth it. Take some classes at community college if you want to do something, but I would wait, because I think that's part of the story, right? I went and I worked because I wanted to find myself, and I figured out that this is the path that I want to take right now. And then I went back to school, and then I did this. Now I'm more clear. And I knew to get internships, and I knew to do this, and I knew to do that. And now this is where I'm at. That to me is such a more compelling story than, well, my parents made me go to college, so I went to college. Why'd you choose this major? Because it was the only one I didn't hate. Right? So yeah, I mean, you're spot on. You're spot on. And I have to do a plug for myself right now. My coaching program is called Control Your Career for a reason, because I came from a generation that was told you have to go to college no matter what. It doesn't matter whether you understand what you want to do or not, but you need to do this. A lot of us were told that we had to take a certain path. We had to go to a certain college. We had to do something specific. And I think we lost our way. And I know that was the case for me a couple of times where I had to pivot. And so I created this program, not only kind of speaking to myself and what I wish I would have had, but all the clients that I've met, that's what it's been about. It's like, I feel like I've lost control. I took a promotion because it was offered to me, or I got recruited over here because somebody reached out to me, whether it was the right thing to do or not. So going back to that self-awareness piece, once you have that self-awareness and you figure some things out, especially if you have some experience, it makes it so much easier to control that path moving forward. And then you're not out there applying to 100 positions, because that's not the way at all. So.
Yeah, no, I love that concept because it actually brings up the old adage of practice. Like if you don't have context, you can't practice. Funny enough, practicing means that you know the fundamentals and you're replicating something over and over again to get better.
Right.
So if you're just going to college and you don't really know what you want to do, and that's why people end up switching majors a bunch of times. And so to your point about getting out, now I usually tell people from a project-based learning and assessment standpoint, which really is akin to being entrepreneurial, you could do that same process. And it's whether you go to school or not. The goal is you should be starting something that you really love. And if you don't love it, you're not going to do it. So that means you're going to have to try more things, and you're going to have to cycle to find what behaviors you like to replicate. And then what happens with that is, now what's the business case for it? How can you, and it's not about making money necessarily, but okay, so how can you sustain that process with that business? Right. So you start to learn about yourself. And it's the same thing of working for somebody. The other thing would be in the, in controlling your career, designing your career, it's who does what you want to do the best? Okay. Yep. Who are they? What's their story? What are they great at? What are they not good at? We were talking about directors, and I deal with a lot of, aspiring filmmakers. And the key thing would be, okay, what does Martin Scorsese do that other directors don't do? So the fact that you would be able to tell his films from someone else's films means they're doing something different. So if you now understand 10 different directors, you can find what style works best for you. It's the same thing with musicians. Most pianists play different, major pieces from other famous musicians, right? So they start to understand their style. Why don't we do this professionally?
We try to tell people to go look.
But you know what I mean? Like from
informational interviews.
But even in the job, like once you have the job, there needs to be a critical study of what makes you good. And how can you replicate that and deliver that? And that's where the growth comes from. Again, that's what an employer and a hiring manager is listening for. That's what, recruiters are trying to be able to tell that story to hiring managers when they're presenting your resumes. So the more that you could share that info and that story, it puts you in a better situation.
Right. Well, and I think this is such a great case for, resources like LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is a prime place for the majority of people, especially if you're on the corporate side, to find connections, and to follow those people and see, look at their career path and look at what they're doing. If somebody's interested in being a recruiter, they can go to your profile, which will be linked for this episode. And they can see where you've been and what you've done, and you have your stuff filled out, right? Because, that's what we do when we're in this business. So you have all that information that somebody can go and say, oh, okay, here's this skill set. Here's this skill set. This is what I need to develop. This is what I need to do. Like, that is so key. And I think once you get into your career, sometimes you forget to continue to be curious about other people and their positions, whether it's somebody adjacent to you doing the same thing so that you can learn how somebody is doing the same thing different, or who's that next step that you're looking toward, and find them and talk to them so that you understand your own gap there.
Julia, and the challenge with people is that they don't focus on this until they have to. And the problem with that is it's never too late. But I'm saying to achieve the goal, when you are in trouble and you have pressure on you,
it takes longer.
It's not the right time. Exactly.
It takes longer. You're desperate now. It's totally, I can't remember if I was talking to you about this, but this is something that's said widely. It's like the best time to look for a job is when you don't need a job.
Right.
Is when you have one, and it's so true. And that's what I try to tell people all the time. I'm like, look, like, whether you are looking for it or not, you always need to be presenting yourself as a candidate. So if you're on LinkedIn, like, you need to have opinions, you need to have thoughts, you need to fill out your freaking profile on LinkedIn.
Come on. It's the low-lying fruit that's out there.
Oh my gosh. Because I have a client right now. I mean, she gets contacted regularly. She's not even looking for anything, but regularly, because she's consistent and she has the right content on her profiles. So it's like, come on, you guys.
It's a free tool. It's out there for you. So the other thing, groups on LinkedIn is really, I think, overlooked. And the reason being, if you're trying to be a part of a certain community, then you want to be a part of that community. It's like the concept of if you're going to fish for certain fish, you got to be where those fish are.
Yes.
So if you want to learn about something, why not be a part of the professional conversation? You don't have to say anything. But again, for recruiters, just the inference that this person has joined certain groups, I have to think, wow, that person is a part of the community. I'm not going to check how active you've been, but you had the wherewithal to join the group. That gives you points with me.
Right.
So there's just some common sense things that people could do. But again, proactively, it ends up being a very different story than, oh my gosh, we're about to get laid off. I need to, how do I redo my resume when I have no idea what I can put on my resume? And that's what I'm sure you live in addition to myself. So,
oh my gosh. Can I tell you, when somebody's like, I need help with my resume, I'm like, do you? Because that's not the first thing. That's not the question.
That's a great rebuttal question though. My dad always used to say, it's better to have a great question than a good answer. So I like that.
They come to me and they're like, do you edit resumes? And I'm like, maybe, but you have to go through this whole process with me before I'll even look at your resume, because it's not about the resume.
Right.
It's not about the resume. It's about everything else. And if I don't know you, and I don't do resume reviews anymore anyway, but like, if you're my client, you've been my client, and I know what we're doing, that's different, but to do a straight resume review, you're not going to get anything out of that. Like, you have to do the internal work. You have to figure it out, because what if you're leaving a position, and whether it's by choice or force, then what if it's your fault? Like, what if there are things that you're going through that you need to adjust for the next position? Like, it.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, it's
Mm.
and I think the value of coaching, hence, you being in a really good place, hopefully, myself being in a good place, is that this isn't just the traditional, like, someone being taught. I mean, this is at the stage of tough love. I mean, this is the stage of you hearing it raw from somebody that does care, and it's not going to be comfortable for you, and you having to listen. You're going to either hear us now, or you're going to understand and hear us later. I mean, and again, it just depends on what situation or circumstance you're going to be in at the time.
Yeah, you like literally just described my coaching style. Like, I care about you, but I'm going to call you out on it if I see it.
Yeah, it's tough because people aren't thick skinned at all, and the challenge with, and I like what you're saying about the resume piece, is that my resume development is about interview training, because if you're not able to really describe it, or even acknowledge what you've done well, the bigger picture, why you're there, I mean, all these different things, then how are you going to say it in an interview? And then the other part, I'm sure you'll relate to this. People will complain and say certain things to me, and I'm immediately like, hey, I don't want to hear it. No. They'll tell me, I'm only telling you because you're the recruiter. And I'm like, listen, if you're telling me, you are going to immediately walk up to that other person's office and you're going to tell them the same thing. So if you're running from a job, we're going to know.
Yeah.
If you're running to something, that's a different story. And so people need to,
you can
they
the
need to be told.
language. I can tell. I can tell when somebody contacts me and how they write their email to me, or their note, their message, whatever. I can tell where they're at. And once I get them on the phone, 30 seconds,
jumps out,
I
right?
can tell. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing that people don't realize. It's like, you think you're hiding it, you're not.
Right. And the scary, I'll just throw this out there to close out what I'm saying. I think hiring managers, most of them aren't good at interviews anyway, right? It does take both. It takes two to tango. Mm-hmm. So what they're doing is they're doing the interview to exclude people. They're not doing it to include you or to have vision for you and find out, hey, they may not be describing this, but I see something in them. Well, sometimes that's the case, but most of the times they're trying to exclude you. Right. So you're right. Those little things, and, the tone and, kind of your true intentions, that intentionality comes out pretty quickly. Yeah. And it doesn't help. So if we can curb that with people and get folks to really know themselves well enough that they can add on when they're doing a new task or they have a new achievement, it's clear. Oh, okay. Right. This is what I'm good at. I think we could really change things for a lot of talent that are running into challenges, with their job search or advancing in their careers.
Agreed. Okay, I want to go back to your story, because I wanted you to share a little bit more about your background. So can you share with the audience, what are like 2 or 3 poignant transitions that you had, like back before Max Edwards, that you feel like really got you to the place that you're at now?
Thank you for that question. So I feel like my career number one, started as a temp. So being from Southern California and, getting a business degree going back to my hometown, I never once really thought about working in entertainment. So, you know, getting recommended for the job from someone, like I was referred to Universal Studios and, hey, you should think of this person. And, I got brought into a temp job for 3 weeks. But by week three, they were offering me the staff job. And I worked 3 years in high volume recruiting. I mean, we were hiring 2,000 people a year, and delivering 30 people every 2 weeks for recruiting classes. So systems, process, I mean, all those things became really critical, because if you weren't efficient and it didn't work. The other thing, just to mention, this early career kind of philosophy forming was, we could not find enough people at the time. I'll date myself, but minimum wage was 5.15 an hour at the time. So it was, funny enough, difficult to find enough people. And so one of the people I reported to, he came from FedEx, or yeah, I think it was FedEx, and they had a strategy called info sessions. And again, this was mid 90s. So, but it was like, don't post and pray and wait for the candidates to apply. Go to where they are, hold sessions, coach them on what it takes to, work at the company and be successful, and, be able to build talent pool that way. And so that really changed my mind, because I did a lot of community outreach at the time, a lot. And it shaped my feeling of, what my mission was in human resources. So that was really poignant. Going from that, it was the Disney stores and global retail, or global entertainment retail. House of Blues was amazing, because that was the advent of the first digital group that I supported, and they were capturing videos of their concerts, and this was pre-YouTube. So if they had, I don't know what the deal was, but somehow it didn't exactly go like they planned. But could you imagine having all of that library of content ready for like a YouTube or something? It was, pretty incredible. But then I got a call from somebody out of nowhere after 9/11, and it was, hey, there's an opportunity to go into television. And what I realized from again, going back to high volume recruiting, to entertainment retail, to concerts, promotions, and food and beverage, was that television, because it was advertiser heavy, really included all of those elements, all of the skills that I'd be recruiting for. It was kind of an aggregate of my previous background. And so, I mean, it was amazing. I was on a 4-person team, and I was the only recruiter, and just it was supporting a 450 person network. It was incredible. And then, unfortunately, there was a merger, and I ended up being laid off. But through that time, I had to select between going to a similar company that literally was going to be kind of the same experience, or choosing this much larger job, which was unnerving. It was further away, so I was going to have like an hour commute each way. And for whatever reason, I decided to choose the tougher path. And that experience of going from supporting one network to supporting 44 different broadcast and cable networks, and a sports division and technology division, and constantly being under resourced, but working with great people, I was able to, I would say, survive it. But through that challenge, also develop new strategies, new techniques, new workflows and processes that became the building blocks of what I brought to Max Edwards. So that ability to go through and survive it, but then take account of, from an architecture standpoint, what were some of the success measures really helped define my entrepreneurial path. And one thing I'll say is, I think if I was more amenable to the corporate politics, certain decisions where I realized what I was being faced with in corporate, and if I played the game, would have been roses that way, right? And if not, I was going to have to deal with those consequences on the other side. And I realized that because I didn't grow up knowing corporate, I didn't grow up knowing entertainment, my goal wasn't to be the executive vice president. It just wasn't my goal. My goal, if you really, hopefully, and I'm saying if you hear me, my goal was to figure out systems, processes, and workflows to solve systemic issues. So I didn't have to be in corporate to try to do that. Matter of fact, it was more limiting when you had to still keep a day job and do things the way other people wanted you to do versus doing it in an entrepreneurial setting. So the blessing for me, and I try to tell people when I'm coaching them, I've gone through the same process, and I still go through the same process. The continuous learning aspect of this whole process was really based on legacy, was to solve a bigger issue. If I could solve a bigger issue, that's the career defining moment that would fulfill me. And I do have to bring up one person. And, my dad was, again, my sensei. He was my Yoda, who I talked to every day on the way home, and got a lot of information and really, shaped me. But I'll give this woman her flowers. This woman, Karen Morcell. I was a coordinator at Universal Studios at the time. And this is where there were no applicant tracking systems back in the day. Matter of fact, we weren't actively using email that much. We were getting faxed. We were posting all the jobs in the paper, and faxes were coming in. Okay. So when I came in the morning, and if the fax machine was silent, that means that it was out of paper. So I just put more paper in, and then it would just keep going. And this was for all jobs. So it was crazy. So my thing was, I had to go into the system, this DOS-based system called Abracadabra, and manually input the names into a system. So anyway, you can imagine I had stacks upon stacks of paper. And as a matter of fact, I eventually put the stack in a drawer. And what I would do is I would stay after, and I wouldn't even claim overtime. But my goal was, I just had to knock out these stacks. And the point of the story is, Karen Morcell came to me one night. No one else was there. And she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Look, I'm trying to get ahead. I'm trying to get this." And I was trying to explain. She's like, No. She said, "Until you change a process or come up with some other form of innovation, you will never get the credit, or you'll never demonstrate the value that you're trying to present." And that stuck with me. And it was really how I was already positioned mentally. Mm-hmm. And that's really, again, if I were to describe Max Edwards, we're really trying to, we're trying to make an impact. We're trying to change things for the better.
Yes. I love that. I love that, because I think there are a lot of people out there that feel that way. And I think, again, now I know we keep mentioning the pandemic, but it's brought a lot of things to light. And I think for some people who are like you, and I'm actually like that as well, very systems focused, systems oriented. How do we improve the systems efficiency? It's hard to be in those larger organizations, and you can see the system failing, and what will fix the system. But either nobody's willing to listen to you, they're not willing to invest, or they just don't care. And it gets so frustrating. And I kind of love that that's one of the reasons that you're doing this from more of an external place now, because in some ways you have so much more power and voice as an external person coming in and going, look, I mean, you have the credentials too, because you're like an OG recruiter, like back in the day.
Oh, thank you.
So, I mean, that's a lot of it also, but to be able to help an organization understand, look, you can save X amount of money in your processes if you implement this, or how much are you spending in time? You know, I used to say to some of my staff, which it sounds kind of arrogant, but it really wasn't meant to be that way. I said, I get paid too much to do this task. Like the organization is paying me too much to sit here and stuff a folder, you know, and I hate to, you know, put people in terms of pay, but if you're more on the like admin side, I'm like, I need you to do this task because I need to be over here doing this, which is what I've actually, you know, been hired to do. And so when you think about it that way, you have to think about the resources that are being usurped in certain processes that aren't working.
I mean, and the silos that people operate within, especially when they've been there a long time, it becomes less about, you know, definitely not about continuous learning, but it becomes less about even collaboration versus hoarding, you know, and, you know, kind of a gatekeeper of information kind of situation, right?
Yes.
And so this is actually maybe a good thing for, you know, your audience as well, is that, you know, once you get the job, it's really important to try to diagnose the environment and circumstances and the people that you're working with, because those are impediments. I mean, sometimes, you know, someone's going to do something one way, and you have to not only maybe understand that and have to adapt to it for a moment in time, and then wait for your opportunity to shine beyond that, or to come up with the innovation. Or you can't come in and change the world immediately. You may have to learn the box first before you start to think outside of the box. So there's a lot of you know, this training that you provide and I'm trying to provide is not just for job seekers. This is for, you know, people that are trying to advance and figure it all out, and maybe add something new to their portfolio of responsibilities. So really critical time for what we're providing.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, if you're somebody who is unemployed right now, that's not even my client. And that sounds really harsh, but I want to help prepare people for that next step. So I want you to be in a position right now to go through my program, because I want in real time to see things unfold. And I want you as, you know, a professional to see things as they actually are. And so when you're employed and you're, you know, relatively happy, that's an easier process than I'm mentally checked out and I'm done.
Very true.
Because we'll have a completely different conversation than if you're like steady in your position. And that's something to think about. And I think the same, you know, I think the same is for you, for what you're doing as well. Like you're trying to get people when they're at their best, because that's when the true version of themselves is going to come out, versus at their worst or when they're desperate. It's going to be completely different. It's going to be focused on whatever their challenges are at the time versus what their opportunities and challenges are moving forward.
True. And I think you bring up a great point in terms of the success rate of people that are going to listen beyond the first steps of this training process. Again, so many people want the just-in-time support because they really need it. And, you know, again, rational thought is out the window, right? Because if it's not something that's going to change them immediately, or, hey, why can't you introduce me to this person, things like that. And so it does. I do think that my process, because I'll deal with whoever comes, right? From executive coaching to people trying to advance, transitioning folks, layoffs, you know, people that recent college grads. But my goal with this, Julia, is this is really a concept to change how we recruit, because this process, and even what you're talking about, actually applies to high school, or you know what I mean. It
Yeah.
applies to different um, sectors, because it is about personal and professional development. And I think the issue that we're having is that the expectation on the employer side is very different than the expectation on the talent side. And again, those two ships are not meeting. And so I feel like, it's a noble process that we're going through, but recruiting in general is going to have to change. There's going to need to be a much more audition based process,
Mhm.
where you share with people what success looks like and you let people try it. And if they're not good today, they may be good 3 weeks from now, or they may be good 6 months from now, but that's your pipeline. And it
Right.
can't be just resume submissions, posting and praying, leveraging. Even recruiters, always talk about leveraging their relationships. All of that runs out, I'm sorry, or will never impact diversity recruiting, inclusive recruiting, equitable recruiting, because you're only still dealing in your area, you know?
Right.
So there has to be a more global, community minded, I call globally local minded
Mm.
approach to recruiting. So your skills aren't just attached to the factory in, Duluth. And if that factory ever goes out, now you're stuck and you don't know what to do. And it's like, no, no,
Right.
no. You can shift and pivot because you know much more about your skill set. And now you're
Right.
in a much better position to take advantage of new opportunities.
Right, right. Okay, I want to jump in to talking more broadly about hiring and recruiting and what is happening right now. So, for anybody that's active on LinkedIn, one of the things that I'm seeing people talk about right now is something called the Great Resignation. There's a couple different terms for it, but essentially the Great Resignation is the one that I see the most. And basically the idea is that people are over it. Like they're over their jobs, they're over whatever BS their company is trying to like make them go back into the office, or they're not getting paid what they think they should, all kinds of reasons. And people want to make shifts. And so the prediction is that over the next probably 6 months to a year or so, we're going to see a lot of people exiting and a lot of people coming back in. And then also things are opening back up again. So hiring, we're rehiring a lot of people and all that. What are your thoughts on this idea of the Great Resignation? Do you think that that is real? Are you seeing that? And what are your thoughts on that?
I think that um, there are multiple layers happening right now, because obviously, we have what, the 10 to 11 million that, may be on unemployment insurance, or, unemployment benefits right now that haven't gone back. You have a really, really hot market for people in certain business functions, to where, number one, there's new opportunities being created, but then also people can't retain their current employees. So it's almost like a double whammy at that level. Plus, you have inflation that's hitting those positions as well. So companies are having to pay more to attract the best talent.
Right.
You also have, maybe from a entry level standpoint, people aspiring for higher level positions, but again, because of the demands of workforce, it's harder on recent grads to find meaningful work. And so the big dearth of openings that are out there are all of these barely living wage jobs, right? These service jobs. And so it's a little bit of a misnomer in the media and within our government, when they're talking about all of the jobs that are open and people getting these 300 extra dollars a week or things like that, it's like they're they be walking away from additional benefits. Yes. And I think some people are saying, I'd rather just stay home and not work and, let me figure out something more. But the challenge with that is it's not like the skill sets of these new jobs are changing. Like they're getting more complex. So as a candidate goes, if you're not evolving yourself during this time or any time, but you aspire to something different. I mean, I don't mean to be so harsh, but it's almost like the definition of insanity, right? Because you could want it, but if you're not actually working towards that, then there's going to be some frustration. So, I mean, it was a long statement to go over the 3 or 4 main sectors, but I do think that there's a challenge that companies are going to face. And it's not so much about people not wanting to work, but they're, to your point, they're definitely trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But think about it. These jobs are jobs. When people really want to think about something, it's like they would think about, oh, what environment am I going to be working in? And, what are the special things that, I'm going to be experiencing? And, they're really thinking about the culture.
Right.
Right. If they work in a good culture, they're usually happy with what they're doing often.
Right.
But if you're talking about skill set and changing up, now it goes back to what you were saying earlier. In order to change up, do you need to go to college? Like, why would you incur debt right now to switch up? So what do you do if you're not going to go to school and incur debt, but you really want to do something different? So entrepreneurial training, I mean, it's really, you have to be on the level of wanting to do it yourself.
I feel like people have more skills though than they think. Like if you've been working, I mean, I'll just like 5 years, let's say 5 years. So, relatively young. You have likely a complex skill set. You just haven't been able to articulate it. And that's what I see too a lot with people is, again, when they get to that place of like, I don't want to do this anymore, the desperation and all of that, especially if they're in an environment they don't want to be in, they also don't think that they're good at what they're doing. So all knowledge of, I'm good at this, I'm good at that, I have this skill set, I have that skill set, it's like out the window because they have this impression of themselves not being great at anything or not being great at the right things, even though some of those things are transferable. Obviously, there are specialized things, that you would have to learn. But I feel like for most job seekers that I see, it's the lack of self-awareness. I think it comes back to spending time really knowing the skills that you bring to the table. Because when I talk to somebody, even for 10 minutes, I could write half their resume for them because they have it in them to talk about their skill sets. But I think they're in their head so much with it that it doesn't come out for them.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. So we're all much better at knowing what we don't want to do versus what we want to do.
Yeah.
And so we're also weirdly trained to typically want things that other people think we're good at. Right? That is like someone else finding value in you. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so good at that. I mean, and that's from a young age.
Yes.
Nicknames on the nicknames in the playground is where that starts. So when it comes time for someone asking you, so what do you want? In an interview, this. So what, tell me your key strengths. These are Achilles heel kind of questions that people can't answer, but it's because we often only define ourselves through other people's filters. So that's, and that's a challenge. So again, going back to this group that may be rethinking things and they don't know exactly what they want to do. The key is to start doing something. It doesn't need to make money immediately, It's not about that. It's about finding what you enjoy, because usually what you enjoy, you will do more often. Do that practice, you'll get better. And it's really, it's very logical. Now, I used to deal in the world of entertainment where, the finance person was a writer, but they were a finance person, or the engineer was an actor.
Oh, man.
Everyone was in a different skill set and function than they actually intended when they first joined or came into the entertainment industry. And that's the issue, is that people aren't ultimately doing what they enjoy doing.
Right.
So there's two sides of it. One, and it's to your point about not knowing what they're good at. Maybe the first thing you do is try to do a self-analysis on finding the joy of what you are currently doing. Because on some level, there has been some things that you've been great at. There's been some achievements. There's been some great people you've worked with. So find something that you can attach yourself to that's been good about what you're currently doing. That's your anchor. That's the legacy. If none of that works, well, no, it'll work.
It'll work.
It'll work. And then the other side of it is obviously analyzing aspirationally what it is you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is the thing with college, and I know you'll attest to this. A lot of people are going to school, getting their degrees, not having really understood what the business output of that degree would be every day.
Yep. And
can you imagine your 4 years, you get out and you don't like having to do sales analysis or,
oh my God,
ratings reports or whatever sorry about the car, whatever the entry level thing is that you're, forced to do when you first start a job. It's hilarious to me. So project-based learning assessment helps you understand what you don't want to do, but it also helps you form and design what it is you want to do. And you could do it over and over again without having somebody else to give you approval to do it.
Right. I will tell you too, if you want to test some things out, go to nonprofits, because
volunteer. Exactly.
They can't pay you.
That's a great.
Go to a nonprofit, offer your services up, piecemeal some stuff together, or professional associates. So if you're more mid career, that's more my audience, go with your professional association and see what they have available, because they're always looking for other skill sets. And that's such a great place for you to try something out. Because let me tell you, YouTube is your best friend when you are trying to learn some new things.
Come on. Yeah. Google, was it YouTube University and all that? Yeah. But you bring up a great point about, because it harkens back to the LinkedIn groups. So your professional association or your industry association is so important, because that's your pool. Like, so you want to be known to be within your pool of talent, so you can now meet a stratus of people that may be your next employer, who knows? But if you don't even know to go to your talent pool, that's a problem.
Yeah. Absolutely. And start adding those people on LinkedIn. Start following them, start adding them, because even if they don't add you back, you can follow them so that you can see what they're posting, what shifts they're making in their career. You have to build that collective of people up so that you're connected. They see your stuff, you see their stuff, and that puts you on their radar. And that's what you really need. If you're honed in to a certain area, I think some people, switch around and stuff like that, which is fine. But, if you're honed in, really start to target what you're doing, and you'll get there. You'll get results. It takes time though. It's not going to happen in a week, but it will happen if you commit the time to it.
Absolutely. Critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Couple questions I want to ask, because these are the questions that I ask all of my interviewees. Tell me how it's changed your perspective of your career or life.
Well, I have a couple. I would say The Spook That Sat Near the Door was a great read and something very inspiring, and um, got me fired up on one, defining what I had already done. So it's like my path kind of mirrored that, but then two, what it could be.
Mm.
So that's number one, by Sam Greenlee. The other one, and I'm gonna share it because I remember my dad recommended it to me, and it was called Rework, and it was done by the head of a company called Basecamp.
Oh
And
yeah.
essentially, this company created, it was kind of like an early Slack,
Hmm.
or an early co-working platform.
Hmm.
And really, I mean, he just in the book, I don't remember the author's name, but he just really redefined collaboration and almost finding the why on why they do certain things, and that really helped the growth of his company and the solidifying of a really strong team and workforce. And it was also allowing them to pivot with the traditional challenges that come up with doing a startup and growing their business. And I'll equate it to how people either hire CEOs or how they hire football coaches. Is that oftentimes when you have a total rebuild situation, there are certain coaches that are better for that situation. But if it's hey, I need to take the company from this level to the next level, or we need to maintain a certain level of performance, sometimes there are coaches or CEOs that are better for that. I'm not saying that it's exactly legitimate, but that is how people hire. And so the book Rework was very much about how we as professionals can kind of navigate through those different stages of development.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I will link those into the blog post for this episode. So if you're wondering where to find them, they will be there for you. Okay, let's really quickly talk about football because I've worked with a lot of student athletes, and that transition from being a student athlete to life, beyond being an athlete, I think can be jarring for some people. And having made that transition yourself, what are some tips that you have for students, or, I mean, sometimes even people who are older, but who are still connected to that athlete mindset? What are some tips that you have for them in navigating their career?
It's a great question. I think the team aspect of sports, especially in college, you're, it's not professional, but you are operating professionally. I mean, there's time schedules and there's certain things that you're having to dedicate yourself to, and the level of study and the I guess the size of the team, is very much kind of like a corporation, to where there's certain people you may not even know that well because the team is so large, especially in college. But you still find a way of collaborating with them at certain periods of time. So, I mean, I could go into it personally, but I will tell you, I had a tough time
Mm.
because I had an injury my last game. Tore up
No.
my knee my last game. So, um, just getting through school, coming off a scholarship, and then having another 2 years to really, I was working 3 jobs at one point. I coached high school football, a certain stint. So there was just so much growing for me post, my sports career. But when I got into corporate, I started to see that the personal system was the same. So there was a
Mm.
level of understanding the fundamentals. There was a level of understanding practice. There was a level of dealing with really, top end players, the team. It really mirrored a lot of what sports is. And I, what I'll let me transition to saying, because maybe candidates, if they hear this, they can also understand what corporations should be thinking or are thinking. So if you're an athlete only, and you're good at what you do, there's a point where you may be recruited, you know, in the 8th grade, 7th grade. You're getting matriculated through different leagues. So if you play soccer, it's oh goodness, I forget the AYSO or whatever it ends up being. But what ends up happening is then you get on these U12, these age, bracketed teams, traveling teams. In basketball, it's AAU, and in football, there may be traveling football teams. So naturally, the community and the system that's being set up by professional colleges, high schools, is all to cultivate the talent through those younger years. And they're assessing you at every stage. There's scouts, parents, people are watching you. And so what happens is they now invite you to camps, and they teach you how to train, and they teach you fundamentals. And so the long of it is, we spend more time committing to the development and evaluation of athletes than we do professionals or students to professionals. Conversely, the same process, though, can be emulated by candidates professionally. So if you're great at math, then next thing you know, at an earlier age, you're getting into math groups, competitions. You know what I mean? You're hopefully going to camps that focus on, so you're practicing, you're learning fundamentals. And the same thing with, the educational institutions, things like that. It doesn't matter that you need to go to the most or the highest prestige school, but it's what you get out of whatever school you go to. And just by doing that, emulating the path of an athlete actually puts you in the best possible situation to be the highest performing you that you could be. And that's, until I realized that, to a certain extent, transitioning into corporate and realize that I can, practice on those things and think of systems in the same way, and, how I get better. I think that really opened up my eyes. And I was really blessed to get into HR that was at a 30,000 foot view of the whole organization and getting exposed to that. But, it's something that, even non-athletes can still look at that model, and that lends itself to being a continuous learner.
Right. Yes. Oh, here's one thing I'll add too, because especially as athletes get older, so maybe you're more like mid-career, and I've had them ask, do I put that on my resume? Do I put that on my LinkedIn? Or maybe they've transitioned to something else. Maybe they're an what do they call, like an ultra athlete, or you're doing marathons, you're doing all these other things. Add that stuff in. Like, put that on your LinkedIn, add it to your resume, because there is a dedication and thought process that if I see that on your information, I'm inferring something about you as a person that's positive, right? You're committed, you can follow through, you can push through hard things, you're pushing yourself, you're pushing your body. If you're on a team, you're working with a team continuously, whether that's what you do at work or not. So I think that's something to remember, is we all have like that professional work life, but we also have the other, life versions of ourselves. And do those things need to cross completely? No, I think definitely have your boundaries up, but share those bits of yourself that will show recruiters, hiring managers, or even your colleagues another side of you that might garner a level of respect that you might not have gotten otherwise.
Especially if you love it. I mean, that's your story.
Yeah, it absolutely becomes your story. And I think people shy away from that because they think it doesn't sound professional. And it's like, no, you need to be memorable. It's not about being, be professional, but be memorable in your interactions with people. When you can do that, that's what you want.
Now, I'll take this to a slightly different fork. Is that from an entrepreneurial side, or whatever that functional area is that you're professing to be good at or interested in. Like if you're a coder, or if you're a graphic designer, or if you're a writer, or I mean, I could go on and on. Typically, they say there's a term, writers. What do writers do? Writers write. So if you're going to have a portfolio of work. So if you say you're a graphic designer, typically you're going to have a bunch of designs that you've done, whether it's been working for somebody or just personally. You're going to have that to share. If you are a coder, you're going to have a website that you've done, or you're going to have some work samples. And that is, I think, in addition to the, not just the hobby, but the broader life experience, you being able to demonstrate that other part of you, it's more than a job. It's who you are. Right. Is really critical. And that's really an interesting part of, because I saw a shift, and you probably saw this too, where hiring managers are looking to hire entrepreneurs. And I'm like, it's a weird spiting your, what do you say, cutting off your nose and spite your face, because you want an entrepreneur, but you're then going to put them in a corporate box. And it may work out for a little while, but it may not work out for that long. And so corporations are going to have to really get a grip and start to understand that I think, number one, we all need to be trained in entrepreneurs, or to be entrepreneurs, but corporations need to also be a lot more friendly and, inviting to that entrepreneurial skill set. So anyway, it's just because even if you're a runner, what happens is that ends up being a networking play. Yep. To where the other like runners, especially from a LinkedIn or, all those people that are running are professionals in some form or fashion.
Right.
So you're part of a running group, or so that's one side of it. But then again, back to your professional organization, or the fact that you are a part of, a startup group. It's just like running. All those people are professionals. They get a chance to know you in a different way. So you're building that kind of full frontal approach. I don't know a better way of saying that, but it's definitely attacking your growth from many different angles. And I think that's one of the most critical things that people don't do on resumes, or they don't do on LinkedIn. And it's just, it's low-lying fruit that you could raise the perceived value of yourself very quickly.
Right. It's being aware. It's being aware of what is around you and asking questions. Like that's all it is.
Come on. Yeah.
And people are so afraid to ask. And it's like, what's the worst that's going to happen is they're going to be like, I don't really care. I don't really want to talk to you about that. And if that's what they say, okay, then you just move on to the next person, and I feel like people have to get over that, the nerves of just asking somebody a question about what they do or who they are, and then you have to be able to answer that for yourself too. So that's the other side of it. But
that's a learned, some people are born with it, but I think that's a learned feeling where you're just fearless and you really don't care. And, no's are like, okay.
Yeah.
And you just go on to the next. I'm not that great at it,
but not that great at it either.
Yeah. It's a path. It's a path we're on. So I accept that.
Right. Well, and I think, it's something that I will always teach people. And I'm so much better at now as an entrepreneur.
Yes.
Than I was when I was working for somebody else, because you have to be. You're forced to be that, whether you want to be it or not. And it takes a lot, you have to find that voice and all of that. But I mean, I think the people who are successful, however you define success, they're the ones that are putting themselves out there. They're the ones that are talking to people. They're clear about who they are and what they want, and they're open to conversations and opportunity. And that's why, they continue to find their version of success. Sure. So, yeah. Oh my gosh, Brian, this conversation has been so amazing. This has been like one of my longest podcasts, but I already knew that.
I appreciate that.
I already knew that going in. So where can people find you? And I can link whatever into the blog post, but where can people find you? How do you want to be contacted?
Sure. Two places. I mean, obviously LinkedIn. It's the easy search on Brian Wright and Max Edwards Company. And then you could also go directly to maxedwardscompany.com, all one word. And I think the opportunity to be connected to you is extremely valuable, because there's enough work to help change people's perspectives, and for them to hear it multiple times from different perspectives, different points of view. I mean, we have a lot of work ahead of us. So I appreciate being in the fight with you, the fight for helping others and for good. And I really appreciate, today. This was great.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I know my audience is just going to find so much value in this. I appreciate it.
I hope so.